In the context of colonial language policy, it may be interesting to take a look at the language policy in Africa. If we look at the history of British colonization in Africa, we see that the language policy served only one purpose, and that was the safeguard of the economic interests of the empire. The opposing uses that the English language had been put to, one being the use of English as an instrument of exploitation by colonizers, and the other of use of English as an instrument of resistance and liberation, played a very important role in the spread of English around the globe. It is these conflicting views of English language or conflicting uses of English language which are linked with the British economic and class structure. One aim of the British Empire through education was to promote the class stratification or the socio-economic stratification in the colonies. And they aim to achieve this stratification or promote this stratification by making sure that the education that people received, it made them an integral part of the context in which they were working, which means that it made them a part of the existing environment, their current environment, and restricted their chances of moving elsewhere. In the context of Africa, South African mines provided the economic backbone of the British Empire. And this economic exploitation of this particular industry in South Africa, or the control that the British Empire had over these mines, it determined the colonial policy not only in South Africa but throughout Africa. So the mines in South Africa were the backbone of the British control or British Empire in Africa, not only South Africa but the whole of Africa. And it was these economic concerns that controlled or that guided the philosophies of several educational philosophers during the colonization, during the period of colonization. And not only the educational philosophers, the colonial administrators also had the economic concerns at the forefront of all their policies, including education and language policies. The main function of these administrators or bureaucrats or the entire machinery of the British Empire was to ensure secure labor to the mines. Their main focus, all their energies were spent on ensuring that there was enough and efficient labor available at the mines. And to ensure that people continued working in the mines and did not move away, they restricted the education to very few people, or the education that they gave was of very restricted nature. So the aim of the education was not to enlighten people or give them more liberty or make them more capable. The aim of the education policy was to confine the subjects to their current environment. So the aim was to give them the education which made them useless for any other job and restricted them to their current environment, that of mining. So the main aim of these policies, or the main focus of these policies, was to keep the rural population on the land in Asia, in Asian colonies, and in local reserves in Africa. Local reserves were these places where the population crowded in search of labor around these mines. So they were called local reserves of peoples. The people were crowded around these mines in such large numbers that the colonizers called them local reserves. So their aim was to keep the rural population on the land in the Asian countries and in local reserves in African countries. So, several colonial administrators have been quoted saying several things which only demonstrate their focus, which was only economic concern and exploitation of the local people. So, we have some of these quotes here. Somebody has been quoted as saying, a colonial administrator has been quoted as saying that book learning lowered the usefulness of Africans for work and made them uppish and conceited. So they felt that if they were given education, the African people will become proud and arrogant and snobbish and then refuse to work on in these mines, and therefore it was better that they were not educated. That is what the underlying idea behind this quote is. Similarly, it was also felt that the education of all Africans will only mean ruin to South Africa. So they thought that educating South Africa would ruin South Africa. Although it wouldn't have ruined South Africa, it only meant that it would ruin for them. They will not be able to exploit South Africa if people got educated and moved away from these mines. So, the colonial language policy in Africa had a twofold purpose. One was to make the African people more useful only to their white masters, not to themselves or to their families, but only to their white masters, and to limit their chances of leaving their environment. They were given the kind of education which would limit their chances outside that environment. So it was thought that instead of giving them general education, as is given to people in different parts of the world, or as was given to was imparted to people in the UK, in Britain, these people should be given education that was very restricted in nature and limited to their chances of it limited their chances of leaving the environment. And elementary industrial education was thought to be the kind of education that would serve this purpose. So instead of receiving education generally, they only received colonized people in South Africa and other parts of Africa as well, only received the elementary industrial education, which prepared them to work in the mines only and completely restricted their chances of moving elsewhere and finding work in other environments.